The number one myth that we're up against in every state that we work in across the country is that hunting pays for conservation and hunting is conservation. That's rooted in something that used to be historically more accurate. People buy guns and ammo for home defense or shooting sports, and hunting is declining. So now we're estimating that 73% of those federal excise tax dollars are coming from non-hunting sources. So when you hear people say, well, hunters pay for conservation, it's actually not the case. By and large, at the federal level, 73% is coming from non-hunters.
You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. I'm your host, Jack Humphrey. We talk a lot on this show about the big sweeping battles at the federal level, but reality is that individual states hold the keys to managing about 98% of the species in this country. And right now, state-level wildlife governance is broken. It's a system built decades ago on a narrow, myopic client model, a model designed to produce harvestable surpluses for hunting and fishing while completely ignoring mass extinction, climate change, and the vast majority of non-game species that actually keep our ecosystems alive. The struggle to reform the system is very real, and the aggression from entrenched interests has become brazen, but we are far from out of options. In fact, some of the most promising radical ideas are starting to take root right now, including building entirely new parallel governance structures like independent biodiversity commissions that put science and whole webs of life ahead of special interests. My guest today is back to walk us through exactly how we flip the script on this old narrative. Michelle Lute is a board member of the Rewilding Institute and the executive director of Wildlife for All, a national organization that is doing the hard, grassroots work to make wildlife management democratic, just, and compassionate. Michelle, welcome back to the Rewilding Earth podcast.
Thanks, Jack. Happy to be here.
So what's new in your world?
Yeah, we're working towards systemic change every day, little by little, and just hanging in there and staying alive, which is also a victory.
Well, in your world, how has all of this affected you? And the aggression has now become naked aggression, and really nobody feels it. To me, here's how I read it. Nobody felt that beholden to anybody in wildlife governance, state, local, to begin with, in any administration, including Obama. I mean, you can go back to whatever you think is the most Camelot of administrations, and I can't recall anybody saying, well, wildlife governance is going really well. And we have so many biologists on these boards, it's almost embarrassing. I mean, there's never been a time like that I know of, unless you do, in some ancient history, maybe Rooseveltian times.
I can't point to a time where it's been that good. There's been a couple, here and there are examples of governors that have been pretty good and appointed good wildlife commissioners, which are, for folks who don't know, really the ultimate decision makers at the state level for anything related to wildlife policy. So we've seen, a little bit of progress here and there in states like Colorado and Washington, but we see all of that progress erode as soon as a new governor takes over and isn't that interested in progressive wildlife policy. And that's true for both Democrats and Republicans.
Does the federal stuff weigh in here? I imagine it would. I kind of liken it to getting a substitute teacher in high school. Every kid in that class knows how to manipulate that situation to their benefit because the substitute is so unaware of all of the dynamics and everything. We all have tried to get away with stuff with substitutes, but I always feel like people in every corner that have wanted to attack conservation, wildlife, habitat, in whatever way that they do it, mining, logging, governance stuff, hunting, just sees this as a substitute teacher kind of situation and this one's belligerently in their favor too. He'll come and party with you. while he's helping you dismantle things. Or maybe I'm reading that wrong. Maybe the Fed doesn't have as much to do with it.
Well, no, I think you're right that the federal level is in chaos, and that's super critical to a lot of our bedrock wildlife related legislation. When people think about wildlife conservation, they think about the Endangered Species Act, they think about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. There's a number of really important pieces of legislation that provide blanket protections for some species, but those are pretty limited. And so what we see is that states are really responsible for something like 98% of the species in this country. And
Mm.
so that's a lot of conservation that could be happening that is not, because state agencies are focused on a certain user group and a sort of client model that funds their work, and that's hunters and anglers, and where it's still allowed, which is most states, trapping as well. So instead of addressing climate change, mass extinction, we've got states who are really just focused on producing harvestable surpluses of game and fish species for the people who want to recreationally go after them, basically. So
You mean
not
the
a whole lot.
people who've been convinced since they were children that they are solely holding up the conservation programs of their state through their hunting and fishing fees?
Yes, exactly. The number one myth that we're up against in every state that we work in across the country is that hunting pays for conservation and hunting is conservation. That's rooted in something that used to be historically more accurate, although that also paints a really broad brush and also ignores the millennia of conservation activities that indigenous peoples were engaging in before white settlers came in and really mucked up the entire system. Look at bison, for example. People want to say like, oh, it was hunters who brought bison back, but it was white settler hunters who killed bison in the first
God, it's
place,
so
right? So
crazy. The revisionism is nuts.
absolutely. Everyone wants to talk about this North American model of wildlife management. It's like, well, that's a solution to a problem that colonists created. It wasn't a problem before, and it's only helped a few game species that people are interested in pursuing, right? So it hasn't done anything for, migratory songbirds or, the vast majority of species that people don't eat or go after. So it's really a very myopic mythology that people want to engage in, to say that hunting is conservation. Hunting is recreation, and it might have some conservation goals depending on how regulated it is, but not necessarily. Conservation, in our mind, is the conservation biology of Michael Soleil and those folks that are about protecting species and biodiversity.
What about hunting where hunters and conservationists agree with each other more? The kind of hunting maybe Dave Foreman did, or
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's for species who are already prey species in the web of life, deer and elk, those sort of species. Yeah, we can allow some level of hunting, and it's can be in line with conservation goals. But what I'm talking about is trophy hunting, predator hunting, which are often, the same thing. Those are where the problems come in. And, I also wanted to note the funding mythology that's so integral to this argument is really no longer the case. So state agencies get their money through a couple federal excise tax dollars at the federal level, and then also license fees. Some states get funding from general funds. There's a whole smorgasbord, a cornucopia, if you will, of funding sources. And it used to be that hunting licenses, fishing licenses, and then these excise dollars on ammo, guns, the kind of gear that you use for hunting and then also for fishing. Those used to be coming from hunting and angling sources. But now, people buy guns and ammo for home defense or shooting sports, and hunting is declining. So now we're estimating that 73% of those federal excise tax dollars are coming from non-hunting sources. So when you hear people say, well, hunters pay for conservation, it's actually not the case. By and large, at the federal level, 73% is coming from non-hunters. So it's always a good statistic to remember to, if you're feeling froggy and want to debate somebody on this topic.
It's very strange how narrative really is the thing that wins out at the end of the day. I mean, we're in a situation, at the macro and the micro local level everywhere. We're saturated with people who have won based on the narrative that they began telling decades ago. It's finally bearing fruit because you've got a lot of people who would totally be surprised about what you just said. In fact, they would think you were lying. And I hope that they at least go look up what you just talked about, because the truth is out there. It's just not coming across the channels that these people tune into every day. They're not interested in that stuff getting out there because people might change their mind, which might mean they might change their votes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean the narrative is I think at the heart of why we're losing on so many fronts in this country right now, and that includes wildlife policy. We have just always been, I say this broadly, we, the conservation community, we, the folks interested in wildlife protection, we're always reacting to a narrative that's already been seeded culturally. And so we've got to tell new stories that are inspiring about the world that we want to build, and that will bring people in more so than, perhaps debating certain facts, although those are very important, and hopefully they come through eventually with the right narrative.
Yeah, yeah. So what other delightful, I don't want to say what's new. Usually you say that with a twinge of hope, like, hey, what's up? What's new? And I'm scared to ask that question to you, but I have to, because it's not just the old regular stuff that, that they're doing, that they've been doing. It's new things too now, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the level of creativity that we're seeing is overwhelming. I almost would say impressive, except for it's working, to erase decades of progress that we've made in over the years. So it's interesting the way things get manipulated. So one example of what's new is a ballot initiative that's gaining some steam in Colorado right now. They're still in the signature gathering phase, but these folks are part of this movement to pass right to hunt initiatives. We've already seen this in something like 24 states have passed right to hunt initiatives, either through legislation or constitutional amendments. And so because Colorado is a state that allows the citizen-initiated ballot initiative, you just got to get enough signatures, and then you can get it on the ballot in November. So we're seeing this pop up in Colorado in a very unique way. So a lot of the past amendments would change the Constitution, basically to enshrine the right to hunt and fish. In Maine, there's also a similar one, the right to food, which is related to hunting and fishing in Maine. But this one is really insidious because basically what they're
It
not.
doesn't sound like it. It sounds totally innocuous. I mean, yeah, right to hunt. I love how they always make their bills sound so angelically innocent. And the more
Right.
so, I think the more evil they could end up being. I don't know if there's a real correlation there or not, but I have a feeling.
Yeah, you're onto something. I think you've sniffed out that something is fishy with this. And a lot of Americans, believe in putting local organic game meat on the table, so they're not opposed to the kind of hunting that would be, for deer or elk to put food on the table, right? But especially ones that don't come from factory farms, right? And that's what I think a lot of people think of when they hear this. Oh yeah, right to hunt. Yeah, people should have this right. But a number of them are insidious and really narrow what is considered like sort of the privileged interests to make certain wildlife policy. So again, instead of any sort of broad-based conservation management, a lot of these constitutional amendments direct the state wildlife agency to privilege traditional uses And that could be trapping. There could be a lot of indiscriminate, heinous, traditional uses of wildlife that modern societies don't want to see. So generally a bad thing. But the new thing that we're seeing in Colorado is that they're really, really narrowing what the legislature could decide, what the State Wildlife Commission could decide. And really what they're asking people to do is to sign away their own rights to be involved in direct democracy in Colorado. So basically, they're saying, oh, sign this petition. It's the right to hunt and fish in Colorado. And people are like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But actually, if you read the fine details, it's about disallowing citizen initiated ballot initiatives for any wildlife policy. So basically, people are signing away their rights to have any sort of direct democracy, any sort of say in wildlife decision making in Colorado. So
Well,
that's not
that's on
Constitution's.
top of the idea that we don't have that much to say anyway. They've already built a wall around that garden that's 90 feet tall in every Western state. Every single one is dominated by little rules here and there meant to trip us up and not have a say already. So that it sounds like they're just trying to close the door once and for all.
Such a good point. Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. That's, we're already up against commissions that meet and don't, advertise ahead of time, don't post their agendas in advance, really are failing at all these sunshine laws around, how a state agency should function and how decision makers should create opportunity for public input. So that's something that Wildlife for All has tried to push people to get involved, to not be intimidated by the process, to be empowered, to know how to find that information. Every month we compile information on every state's commission meetings that are being held that month, just to, make that information more accessible, because that's the first barrier. So yeah, there's so many barriers to getting involved. And then once you do, show up in this meeting, you see that no one else looks like you in the room and people are not welcoming to you. We've had that so often with advocates who are excited. They've finally realized that it's not just the Endangered Species Act. They can get involved in wildlife conservation in their backyard, and they're going to go to their wildlife commission meeting. And then, it's, hunter folks in flannel and, they're not necessarily always welcoming. And again, I'm painting broad strokes. This is not, not all hunters are bad or not welcoming to wildlife advocates, but it can be really intimidating when you're the
It's
only.
meant to be. It's very
Yeah.
much meant
Yeah.
to be. The whole thing is dress up. It's all playing dress up. They've turned the hearings into something that looks and feels official by the way that they get to use the state's logo. But at the same time, you only have to go to a few of them to realize that everybody here is on stage, is in the limelight, is doing their part to make it so that when we say, hey, you guys need to show up, they know we're coming. And every single feeling you get during that process is meant, and it was put there on purpose. You were meant to feel that way.
Absolutely.
Definitely. They've been unwelcoming for decades. This is not the new part. It's just, I guess they're getting tired of us even showing up in the small numbers that we do. And that's just such a bother that if we could just make it so they don't ever come back and we never have to see any of those people again. That's what this initiative maybe is saying.
I'm sure there's plenty of people behind this initiative that would agree with that statement. Yeah.
It's just so inconvenient to have to do the right thing or consider
know.
anything other than our own narrow myopic interests.
Democracy is messy,
Yeah.
it's hard, but
Yeah,
you
we
gotta
probably ought to have some classes or some, just okay, before you go to your first wildlife governance hearing, here are some things you need to know.
Yeah.
Like, get people prepared, because I'm sure that we've pushed some people into that situation who are never coming back.
Right.
Just because it's not what you think, and nothing that you were told in school about how government works or any of that stuff. So yeah, maybe a new organization needs to start just to getting people, prepared to go to these meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. I would support that.
Wilderness is self-willed land. A wild animal is a self-willed animal. They are earthlings that are as yet not thralls to man. Those words from Dave Foreman define why we do what we do. The Rewilding Earth podcast is a long-running project of the Rewilding Institute. Because of listeners, donations, and people and organizations sharing this podcast with others, you've helped us spread the blueprint for a wilder, more self-willed world. But we can't let up. Most of the world still needs to absorb what it means to restore nature for its own sake. Please consider making a donation today to support the show. Your gift helps us reach the next generation of rewilders who will rebalance the natural world. Go to rewilding.org/donate to help us spread the word. And thanks for standing with the wild.
Okay, so let's remind everybody, if you are kind of new to this issue and you've stuck around this long, congratulations. Your curiosity is really, really inspiring. We probably should have got this out of the way in the beginning, but wildlife governance, traditionally, I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about it. My way is to say that wildlife governance is basically supposed to take care of all wildlife in a state and consider everything. And that's only ever been true on paper since its existence, as far as I know. And the reality is it's meant to take care of all the hunting species. And that would be okay if it just did that, I think, and just didn't also go after predators and go after new wolf reintroductions and things like that on the basis that it is going to interfere with prey species and hunters and getting their big bucks and all of that kind of stuff. And they've developed massive amounts of propaganda over the years to thwart efforts at every step to do anything right by the other vast majority of species they don't care anything about. They don't spend any money on, and they don't do anything to do real conservation work for. I don't hold back, and maybe I say too much. Maybe it's not that bad. You tell me.
No, it's it's that bad.
Come on.
No, that's fair. It's fair.
Oh, man.
And it's why, it's why a number of folks in our coalition, 'cause Wildlife for All leads a coalition of advocates across the country that are involved in all kinds of wildlife policy. A number of us are starting to think more and more about alternative governance structures. So let the current kind of structure around fish and game commissions, what they should be called, really, and a lot of them are still called that, let them set regulations for the species that are designated as game in their state. And then have an alternative structure, an agency that's focused on actual biodiversity conservation and environmental protection and protection of wildlife species. So there could be an alternative.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, that might be the way, rather than trying to change a system that is completely broken. When you start
Nobody can say you haven't tried. Like literally nobody who's followed
Yeah.
this issue could say that advocates have not tried over all of these years. Like there's no stone that's been unturned in trying to infiltrate the good old boy network and get biologists on the commissions and other people starting a whole new thing. And then it has to have teeth. Like they'll be senior and all that. Well, that's not how we do things. And that's what that other new agency is going to have to come up against. So it should get the backing of the governor, right? And they'll have to take them seriously. But it would be nice to have an organization that just kind of feels like an advocate for the rest of everything biologically, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they would have some power to stop these guys from making the wrong moves. And that, man, I would love that just because it would make them so mad. Not only can you not have this initiative in Colorado to close the gate and lock it, that we never show up at a wildlife commission meeting again, but we're going to also develop a new biodiversity commission. And we got the signatures for that, and everybody's going to vote for that. So, that's the way I want to see it go.
I would love to see that. There's the devil is in the details for sure. There'd be some things to work out, like, what about when predators are listed as game species in the state, which, a biodiversity focused agency would never agree with. Think mountain lions, wolves, bears, that really should be under the aegis of a more biodiversity protection oriented kind of governance process. So there'd be some debate and friction around who has the authority over certain species that are controversial. So it wouldn't fix all the problems, but it's definitely would be an amazing step in the right direction.
Having people involved that have the backing of the state, and some of them being employees paid by the state to make it their life's mission, their full-time job, to advocate, where we have been having bake sales relatively all of these years to do the same thing, to just try as hard as we can with whatever little resources we have, and mostly volunteer time, uh, to do this. That would be a huge step. That would be by itself a huge step, despite the problems of course that would have to be worked out, especially the ones we don't even anticipate.
And that's why, we need to talk about systemic change and protecting like foundational democratic process, because the vast majority of Americans are with us. They want biodiversity protected. They want a wild world. They want state agencies and federal agencies to support rewilding initiatives. They want those things and they're willing to fund them. That's another mythology, that people are not willing to have their tax dollars go to that. I'm sure most people would rather their tax dollars go towards a healthy environment than, say, a war overseas in Iran, for instance, right? So the foundation is there. The science informs these policies and the public supports them. And so it's really just the political entrenched special interests that are getting in the way of not just wildlife policy, but so many things that Americans agree on nowadays.
That is very strange. And it used to go on, they used to use a lot more subterfuge. They were not as naked in their aggression toward conservation and conservationists and what the majority of Americans want. And now they are, and it's just really weird to see it flaunted, knowing they're the minority. They're in positions of power. That's the problem. But at the same time, you have to know in the back of your head, if you're one of these dudes, this is not sustainable. They're gonna come at us with pitchforks and torches once they realize they have the numbers and they're the ones that really have the power. And I think people are waking up. I'm seeing signs of that. And we're getting a lot more support from people who have been quiet. I don't know if you're seeing that too on your side with Wildlife for All, but I think people are getting fed up.
I think so. Yeah, I think people are getting fed up, and it's just a matter of organizing, building community, and working against it. But, to your first point, federal leadership is saying the quiet part loud because they're not talking to American citizens anymore. They're talking to the billionaire class. That's who's going to keep them in power. And I think they are hoping they won't have to worry about voters in a couple years, or even maybe in the midterm elections in some cases. So, um, if anyone's paying attention, I think they can see through that. People are smart enough to understand what's going on here. It's just the crux is to organize, to be courageous, and to fight against this system. But what was the news yesterday that, folks who were protesting ICE are getting, like 30 to 100 years prison sentences? Like that scares people, understandably.
Well, I
That's
mean, that's bad, but go try to pick some of that stuff out of the bottom of the reflecting pool and see how many years you're threatened
right.
with.
Even that. Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
it's becoming the thing that we used to just have in movies and books, or in World War II. So what, I mean, my biggest question, I think that people listening now would probably have, one of them would be, what do we do? It's always the one. This is always the question. What do I do? Like, you've just laid out this entire huge juggernaut working against us now, where they've really, really, really hit their stride because they've got support from the very top all the way down now. And they're just doing now what's ever been expected of them. If they were ever given all the power they could have, they're doing exactly what I think they would do.
Mhm.
How do we pull as much through this little tiny hole we're being forced through as possible so we can get to the other side?
Such a good question. And that's really what the state level governance opportunities present for us. Right now, federal government is a lost cause, and that creates more opportunity at the state level. Um, you know, Agencies at the federal level have fired so many people. It's really created a vacuum that states can fill if they prioritize it with funding and then perhaps the creation of more agencies and commissions to address these problems. But the first thing is to not lose hope. Not saying engage in kind of magical realism or magical thinking, I should say. It's not blind optimism, but I think there's some real hope that uh, the down ballot kind of voting matters, the showing up at your state wildlife commission meetings and just refusing to go away, refusing to be intimidated by the process. And the more of us that start organizing and showing up, the more power we're going to have, because there still is democratic process at the state level. Now that varies state by state, but that's the opportunity that we have right now, to get informed, understand what grassroots organizing looks like and what's effective, and find like-minded people to build community and start showing up in mass. I think that's what we have to do. I don't know what else to suggest we do. Some people say, "Oh, let's just wait. Let's just wait 3 more years until the next administration, and then we'll be able to do work again. We'll be able to bring lawsuits at the federal level to protect the Endangered Species Act." That was never enough. We need to be laying the groundwork a decade ago, but let's do it now. And that's also, earlier we were talking about narrative and mythology. We can also be telling more hopeful stories and thinking about those narrative-based strategies to bring people along. Because there's still people who don't understand that there's opportunity at the state level. There's still people who think it's just the Endangered Species Act that is where conservation happens in this country. So there's still just awareness to bring people in, and then education, and then empowerment for these grassroots organizing tactics and strategies.
You would be asking a lot if people had to take it just on your word that that's some good advice. But they don't, because that's exactly what the other side did. Everything you just described is exactly everything that they did. They organized, they got up on all of the issues, they devised their talking points through all their different hunting organizations and everything else. And then they came and they applied pressure. I mean, they did everything. So it's not like people have to take it on blind faith that what you just said can work, because we already have a demonstration that it has. And they're sitting in the catbird seat because they worked their butts off and applied a lot of leverage and did some underhanded stuff too and everything else in between. But you can't take away from somebody, even if they're on the wrong side of an issue, when they have worked their butts off. And there is a track record that goes back a long, long way that shows they've been building up to this moment for a long time. And like you said, 10 years ago would have been a great time for us to start. And in some ways we did, but we need to keep going is what I'm hearing you saying. But we can't just stand by, and there's no time to wait. I don't think. I think that's crazy, waiting for another administration. We have to do the work now. We have to get involved now.
I couldn't agree with you more. 100%. We cannot look backwards. And that's been a challenge with conservation biology for a while. Is that we wanted to, especially in North America, we wanted to say, let's define the baseline as, European colonialism kind of wiped off the face of the earth so many species. So let's go back to before that. But I mean, our climate is changed forever in a different direction. So we can't look backwards. We have to look forwards. And,
Yeah.
Talking about our current political system, I mean, it's just so much easier to dismantle systems than to build them. So, every year of this current administration undoes so many years of progress. So we've got to disrupt and resist what's happening in the next couple of years, and then be very prepared to be creative, to be collaborative, to rebuild when we get that chance. So yeah, I mean, maybe there's a silver lining that, our entire world and our political systems are completely on fire because we're kind of starting from scratch. So there's some there's some trade-offs,
Well,
some
I
real
mean,
trade-offs there, but
yeah, ideas that would seem radical from the before times would seem plausible now. The stuff that conservative conservation environmental groups would go to DC with because they don't think they're going to buy anything tougher. I mean, that's just not going to do. That's just not going to be, it's the crazy stuff that we didn't take up to the Hill to lobby on. It's the crazy stuff, crazy according to them, not us. It's
Sure.
what we know needs to be done by the science, and doing that and bringing that up in certain circles, they think you're crazy. But yeah, we're going to be coming with all our crazy stuff, right? All the stuff in the bag in the corner of our office that we just been holding for a special moment, like the fall of the first stage of America or something. That bag is what I'm taking to DC and talking to everybody about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. How are you not crazy nowadays? I mean, I think if you feel sane right now, then you're not paying enough attention.
True. We're gonna have a new definition of that too. Like literally everything's on the chopping block here.
Yep. Yep.
So let's get people ready. Like, I'm in a state. Everybody listening to this is probably also in a state. What in the world do I do right now after hearing we need more boots on the ground? We need more, I wouldn't personally recommend anybody go to a wildlife commission thing right off the bat. I would probably go find some friends. Is that what you would recommend
Oh,
first?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certain personalities might be ready to jump in head first, but
But even they would be helped by going and getting,
sure.
on the same page with everybody else in the state on the issues and everything. I mean, they would even be more deadly at the hearing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, find those friends. You might already know them, start talking to them about the
What are
issue.
some of the names of groups that are kind of similar in the states, that they can look for? I mean, I'm talking about people who are hearing this for the first time and they really don't know what's going on in their state. Where do they start looking?
That's a great question. I mean, it's so variable state by state. There's not, you know, there's very few organizations that have state chapters that will be your go-to. So without naming names of the organizations you shouldn't go to that, kind of sound like they're wildlife oriented, but are really hunter oriented, I'll just leave it at that. Email me, I'll tell you personally. But you could look at some national organizations that have state-based chapters, like the Sierra Club. Sierra Club has not been doing a whole lot of wildlife policy lately, although they, are very supportive of it. But that's a place to start. And those folks in your state-based chapter will know who else to talk to. And those might be individual advocates and they might be state-based organizations. A number of states that have organizations focused on banning the use of trapping are usually pretty aligned with pro wildlife policy. So, in New Mexico, it was called Trap Free New Mexico. And we were a coalition of organizations and individual advocates that got traps, poisons, and snares banned on public lands across the state. So look if your state has a similar kind of organization, and that's a great place to start. But yeah, it can be hard depending on the state and the culture of how people interact with nature and wildlife. Across the West, there's a lot of outdoor recreational communities that can also be helpful. But you can find those people on your own. I mean, that's if you're on social media, that's the beauty of social media. You can share posts that resonate with you with other folks and see who starts responding and build your group that way. So there's a number of tools available to us to find those like-minded individuals.
I still feel like a really big obvious tool is missing now that I hear you talking about it. Why don't we have a list of every single state, the organizations we would recommend, like listeners of this podcast, to reach out to, and at least the battleground states where this stuff is the most egregious, or that seems like a tool we ought to build tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean we've been incrementally working towards that. So I mentioned Wildlife for All's coalition. We've got over 250 advocates in this coalition. Some are representatives of state-based groups, some of national groups, and then a lot of individual advocates as well. So right there, we've already got a list. So, and I get people who reach out and when they're new to learning about this issue and they say, "Hey, I'm in Florida. I really want to, protect black bears and fight this like crazy real estate industry that's selling wildlife to the highest bidder." And I know the folks to direct them to in Florida. It's like, start talking to this person and she'll get you completely up to date on who else you need to be talking to and what meetings to go to. So we've got that. But yeah, we need to think about how to make that searchable, or, we also have to think about protecting people's identity. So it's a little bit, manual, but maybe that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like a Google phone number in every state. That's like a hotline that somebody could then, they
Ooh,
can
yeah.
expose themselves when they feel like it's necessary or safe to do so. Yeah, that'd be really. So ultimately, we need to go to Wildlife for All. What other kinds of goodies do you have on the site for people to, other than your newsletter and things like that, which everybody, of course, sign up. Also, the links for this will be in our extra credit section on this episode. But what else do you want them to do, see, get familiar with? Because I'm like, well, duh, you guys are probably the obvious place to go. No matter what state you're in, wouldn't it make sense to just go to Wildlife for All first and then start picking your way through resources there?
Absolutely, because our website has got so much information. So we've got a toolkit for folks who are just getting started, but it still has a lot of useful information, even if you are not new to this scene. It's still got great talking points and ways to start getting involved, and just understanding the nuances of what does governance mean, how does it work, and the funding structures are like very complex. And we've got a find your state feature, so you can click on your state on that map, and it's going to give you the whole breakdown. It's going to give you the state agency mission statement, their authority. It's going to give you the percentages of funding sources, all kinds of stuff to get you started on that front. And then, like I said, we compile commission meetings every month. So we've got that information. We've got a primer on your state wildlife action plan, which is really where state agencies do the most planning around what they call species of greatest conservation need. And those are all those species that are once abundant, now declining, or data deficient, but those typically non-game species that need more protection, but are so often underfunded. So you can start learning about some priority species to get involved. And then we just, in the last couple of months, finished our first cohort of grassroots organizing trainees. And so we've got that program. If you're really interested in getting involved, it's an 8-week program that we give you the whole understanding of governance and grassroots organizing, and really kind of walk people through how to start a campaign in their state. And we've got, a number of people from that first cohort who are getting involved in starting campaigns. So pretty exciting way to empower people and let them start their own organizations, or just do this as an individual advocate and find other support. So yeah, the website is a treasure trove of information to understand to get you started.
And if you look and look and look around your state and you don't find anyone, then guess what? You're the one. You're
Exactly.
it.
Yep. And join our coalition, and we'll support you along the way.
Awesome. Michelle, thank you so much also for everything that you do. You're a lifelong activist, and you've done so much incredible work in your career and educating countless thousands and thousands and thousands of people along the way.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for listening.
On behalf of everyone at the Rewilding Institute, thank you for listening, sharing, and supporting the Rewilding Earth podcast. Over the last 9 years, this show has grown into a significant global community because of people like you. If you'd like to keep that momentum going and rewild the world with us, please head over to rewilding.org/donate. Your support ensures we keep telling the stories that the wild needs us to hear. Thanks for listening.